Everyone, I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We have an eye on southern Texas tonight, Boca Chica to be specific, where the largest, most powerful rocket ever built by SpaceX, or anyone else for that matter, is set for launch momentarily. President-elect Trump is there with Elon Musk. I want to bring in CBS News political reporter Jake Rosen, who joins us from West Palm Beach, Florida. Jake, it's great to see you. President-elect is there with Elon. This has been something the public has been watching build over the last several weeks, this very tight relationship between the president-elect. All right, we're going to toss to the rocket taking off right now. Jake, hold on, stand by. Everyone watch as the Super Heavy-Starship takes flight from SpaceX manufacturing headquarters in southern Texas.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Booster Raptor, chamber pressure nominal.
Booster and ship, avionics, power, and telemetry nominal.
All right, we're just a little over a minute
maximum
into flight.
Dynamic pressure.
We're about 6 miles away, so all the sound's still hitting us here. Hearing good call-outs that power telemetry nominal, that's flying straight and true. We do see all 33 Raptor engines lit up on telemetry screens. At this point, we've passed through that point of maximum aerodynamic pressure, that max Q. Now, coming up in just a little over a minute from now is going to be hot staging. So we're going to see the 6 engines on the ship ignite while still attached to the booster. Just before that, we'll see all but 3 center engines on the booster shut down. In what we call MECO, it's most engines cut off instead of
So
8.
we are listening to the initial rocket movement of SpaceX's Super Heavy-Starship. This is SpaceX's 6th test flight. This is a means by which to test and keep testing this very large, the largest ever rocket manufactured by SpaceX or anyone else. The idea is to test out not only its range and its abilities, but also to see if it is sufficient to not only take astronauts to the moon, but begin the process of building rockets large enough to potentially, in the next 5 to 10 years, reach Mars. What we're seeing there is the firing of 6 different rockets within this Super Heavy-Starship. They're fueled by methane and oxygen. I want to bring in Jake Rosen, who is watching this, as all of us are, from West Palm Beach, Florida, where there's been a considerable amount of transition news for President-elect Trump today, but also the president-elect is there. Jake, talk to us about the political implications of this relationship between the president-elect and SpaceX chairman, Elon Musk.
Well, we know, Major, that Elon Musk has been by President Trump's side almost every day since the election, down here behind me at Mar-a-Lago and in West Palm Beach, attending public gatherings, lending a private ear to Donald Trump. And this is something that Donald Trump had talked about, this launch and this kind of American ingenuity, pledging to A, bring it back, and B, like you just mentioned, a promise to go to Mars at some time during his presidency or soon after. Really an embrace of what America can be that Donald Trump promised. However, it really doubles down and triples down his ties to Elon Musk, a man who donated over $100 million of his own money to make sure that Donald Trump got elected. So these two men really celebrating a momentous achievement for American ingenuity, but also their political achievement just over a week ago.
And Jake, this is one of the questions that will confront the Trump administration once it takes office. Elon Musk has sparred publicly and privately with 2 federal agencies specifically related to activities with SpaceX. One is the Environmental Protection Agency. The other is the FAA. And this relationship, visible now there on site at this launch, sort of underscores the ability that Elon Musk will have, the unique ability he will have to have, once he becomes president, President Trump's ear on these regulatory matters and clashes he's had with the EPA and the FAA.
And not just that, Major, but Donald Trump's relationship with foreign governments. As we still compete with other countries to do these things, we still compete, especially Elon Musk does, on the world stage with other international companies who are trying to do this kind of work. And the conflicts that Elon Musk has with China because of Tesla and SpaceX, the same with Russia and other parts of the world, too. We have to remember just the conflicts that Elon Musk brings into this, in addition to just generally his advice, though technically he's not part of the Trump campaign or the transition process, but he has been helping publicly and privately, like I said, to help sort out and pick through who Donald Trump surrounds himself with, even writing back and advocating for people who have not been selected in this transition process, too.
And Jake, other aspects of this that you find notable in terms of either President-elect Trump's fascination with SpaceX and what Elon Musk has been able to accomplish, and what Elon Musk's role with this quasi-semi-White House officially sanctioned efficiency department may or may bring to this or other matters before the federal government?
Well, certainly Elon Musk, yes, he's been promised that role, but I think the more important thing, in addition to that kind of that blue ribbon committee who can recommend to Trump to cut certain parts of the federal budget that are under Trump's control, is really the direct line that we know that he has to Donald Trump, the direct line to being here at Mar-a-Lago and in West Palm Beach, meeting with advisors, vetting people, and picking people who Trump surrounds himself with. How long that lasts remains to be seen, but Donald Trump, going back through about the Republican National Convention time, Trump has been talking about these kind of rocket launches for a long time, and really that is what sparked Elon Musk's involvement in the campaign. It was the launch of that America PAC that supported Donald Trump in states like Pennsylvania, really ran the ground game in other parts of the campaign, in addition to Donald Trump's really fascination, like you said, bringing it up at almost every rally, his obsession and really realization that what Elon Musk is doing is special and he should have him in his corner.
Jake Rosen, thank you very much from West Palm Beach. I want to bring in Oriana Pawlyk, who is with Politico, who has written extensively about Elon Musk and the FAA. Oriana, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. How would you characterize Elon Musk's relationship with the FAA, and how would you imagine it might change with his close alliance, and that's putting it mildly, with the incoming president?
Yeah, I think the way to describe it is an absolute flashpoint right now. It has had some friction dating back to 2021 when then FAA Administrator Steve Dickson had to call and talk with Elon Musk, kind of gave him a little scolding on how he was doing business and expanding in Texas. And I think that that has a shadow over how he's going to continue to deal with the FAA and the so-called worker bees that do space regulation over his business, as well as the organization that clears the skies for the many aircraft that, traverse the U.S. every single day. So, whether or not he has the president's ear on this is, wait and see mode, whether or not Trump has some sympathy on how he's going to help Elon Musk's business with the FAA's oversight. Right now, the first buddy, Elon Musk, seems to be doing exactly what we're watching right now. He is still launching his rockets. So it's just a matter of how that relationship is going to progress or deteriorate over the next several months.
And Oriana, let's lay down some basics for our audience. What is the FAA's role in Elon Musk's world, that is to say, space launches, and what have they clashed over previously?
Right. I mean, the FAA only has oversight over launch and reentry. So from the time the rocket goes through the atmosphere to the time it touches down, but it doesn't regulate the people on board. It has, significantly a lighter touch from some of the other organizations that, he's also been clashing with throughout the Biden administration. But, ultimately, they do have to keep passenger travel quite safe. And there are thousands of flights that go across the United States every day. And to close airspace takes significant amount on, the traffic that's up there. Air traffic controllers have to dedicate their time. And that's really what this conversation has evolved to. Like, how can you continue to continue the cadence of these launches at the pace that he wants to keep them at, while making sure that everyone stays safe in the skies. And so that's the conversation that everyone's having at this moment.
Oriana Pawlyk with Politico. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it very much.